I want to start by thanking you for hosting me here and thanking you all for staying so long at this late hour and hear my talk. I'm going to talk about the economic representation deficit in Europe, and I'm going to talk about policy congruence between voters and their European representatives. In the last 5 years, we've seen economic issues being the most important issues in Europe. The fall of the euro, the growing influence of European institutions over national economic decision-making. Some of this has been discussed already. We've seen economic issues grow more and more important in the European Union. And the question that I'm going to answer here are our European representatives, in this case the members of the European Parliament, are they representatives of the economic positions that the citizens who voted for them have? So the main theoretical question that motivates this research is, are the views of these citizens and politicians, are they congruent? However, when doing this research, I stumbled upon a more methodological problem, and that is that the views of European citizens and the views of the politicians that represent them on economic issues are not structured by the same dimensions. And having the same dimensions to where your positions are structured by is a very important precondition for good representation. So the basic idea of a representative democracy is that citizens through elections elect an elite, and that this elite is responsive to the positions of those citizens. So when citizens have a center-left-wing position, the elite that they will elect will also have a center-left-wing position. So it's a very basic idea of how a representative democracy should function. In this case, we're looking at the European Parliament. However, this assumes that citizens and elite are both positioning themselves on a socio-economic dimension, on a single socio-economic dimension, which we label left and right. And in my research, I've been growing more skeptical that socio-economic issues at the level of the citizens are structured by this left-right dimension. So if we look at left and right, there are multiple issues that are beneath it. For instance, the question of state intervention is beneath this left-right dimension, with the left favoring a stronger state intervention and the right favoring the market. The left will favor economic equality, the right will see economic inequality as a way to enhance economic performance, as an incentive. The left believes in a more generous welfare state, the right believes in a more limited welfare state. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, that doesn't really matter. The left favors nationalization, the right favors enterprise. I mean, these issues of left and right, as political scientists, it's very simple to think that this is the way things are, that the left favors state intervention, equality, nationalization, and the right favors market, laissez-faire principles, economic inequality, and enterprise. However, it might be the case that these issues are not related, and this creates a multidimensional space. I'm going to look at 4 dimensions in this paper, which are asked in the European Election Survey, but for most of the presentation I will look at 2 dimensions, because representing 4 dimensions graphically just becomes slightly mind-boggling. So it might be the case that instead of having these dimensions being parallel to each other, they're actually orthogonal. And this creates multiple positions: the traditional left-wing position of egalitarianism and interventionism, and a right-wing position in egalitarian non-interventionist. But it also creates a number of positions which, from the perspective of political science assumption that there is this left-right dimension, are inconsistent. So this isn't a moral judgment that's inconsistent, it's rather a judgment that, from the perspective of the assumptions that we have as political scientists, these positions don't fit that model. So there might be a reason to think that at the voter level, the left-right are not parallel, or these different issues are not parallel. And it's because economic issues are particularly hard issues. They're very technical issues. A lot of issues that are debated in politics, like do you want headscarves, will you allow euthanasia, might be difficult questions in the sense that they're moral questions, but they are symbolic. If you're in favor of headscarves, people will wear headscarves. If you're in favor of abortion, abortions will occur. These are very symbolic issues. Economic issues tend to be more technical in nature, and there's a high complexity to them. For instance, if you favor higher taxes, does that mean that my taxes will go up as a citizen? Does that mean that tax income will come up, or will actually richer people move away? These are very complex issues which might not necessarily be clear to citizens. At the level of the elites, however, responsibility limits the combinations of different positions that politicians can take. So Peter Maris argued that responsibility limits the kind of positions that politicians can take. Politicians have to be consistent, they have to be reliable. Politicians that call for utopian socialist state can't enter government because that isn't realistic for them to do that. So responsible politics means that they can't be too extreme. What I argue in this paper is that responsibility might also imply that parties have a limited number of positions that they can take because there are logical relationships which are apparent to elites between positions. We can very simply illustrate that. If you want a more equal income distribution, which is a very standard way of measuring a left-right position, that implies that you're going to want more government intervention, because from the economic sciences we know that if we leave the market to itself, this will create an unequal distribution of income. So one position implies the other position. Well, the same is true for other issues. For instance, nationalization of key economic sectors implies that you will have less free market enterprise. There are these logical links between economic questions. The single most important logical link is the budget. You can't spend €1 twice. If you can spend it on less taxes, you can spend it on higher social welfare spending, you can't spend it twice. There are these logical links between positions, and that constrains elites. So that means that the following might be happening, namely that voters for whom economic issues are very complex and who don't see these links between these issues will be spread out all over the political space in this two-dimensional, but might also be in a four-dimensional space. However, politicians, because they are constrained by this responsibility, can offer left, center, and right positions. They can only offer, if they favor egalitarianism, they also must favor interventionism, because those two are logically linked. So the hypothesis that I'm going to test here is that the economic views of politicians better fit into a single dimensional left-right model than the views of citizens about the same subject. So I'm going to use the European Election Survey from 2009. I'm going to look at 20 countries which have enough candidates in them, meaning I have 1,200 candidates and 1,700 voters, 17,000 voters, sorry. And I'm going to look at 4 items that have been asked both to citizens and to candidate parliamentarians. And these include private enterprise, government intervention into the economy, the redistribution of wealth, and the public ownership of services and industry. So very basic economic left-right questions from which we as political scientists would assume that these would form a single socio-economic left-right dimension. In order to test whether these are actually whether this is actually one dimension or whether there's a multidimensional structure beneath this, I'm going to use a method from item response theory, Mokken scaling. And because not all of you might be experienced with that, I'm going to explain briefly how it works. Mokken scaling was developed to test the quality of exams. And the basic idea is in exams you have easy questions and difficult questions. Easy questions are questions which a lot of people get right. As you can see, 75 people in this hypothetical example have the question right. And difficult questions are questions that a lot of people answer wrong. In this case, 75% of the people answered the difficult question wrong. Now, if we measure one concept, the people who answer the difficult question, the easy question wrong, will not answer the difficult question right. So there is a cell of people who answer the easy question in the wrong way. They cannot answer the difficult question in the right way if we measure a single dimension. So basically, what Mokken scaling does, it looks at the size of this single cell. And basically, if that cell is empty, the H value is 1, and the larger that cell gets relative to the others, the lower the H value gets. And basically, an H value below 0.3 implies that the items that you're using don't form a consistent scale. So, here we have the results for the Mokken scaling for the 10 strongest countries, where we can strongly see the difference between the voters in blue and the elites in red. The elites consistently have very high H scores, meaning that for them, economic issues are very simple. If they are egalitarian, they're also interventionist. Voters, however, have much less consistent answers. They're very low, and in all countries it falls below this 0.3 level. And these are actually the countries where it's still highest. I mean, we're looking at a value around 0.1, which means that this isn't a single dimension. Now, if we look at the countries in which the results are slightly poorer, we can see that, again, still here, consistently, voters have less consistent views about socio-economic matters than the elites. in all of these countries, the difference is very strong, except for Latvia, where apparently the elites don't have a very consistent opinion about socio-economic matters. So, what I've shown here is that consistently voters have less consistent views about socio-economic matters, that they cannot be that their views cannot be structured into a left-right dimension, and rather elite views mostly can, except for a few exceptions. So you might say, why would I care about this? What is relevant? What kind of representation deficit are we looking at? So here I've projected the views of candidates on the one side and the views of voters on the other side on 2 dimensions. And you can see that the views of candidates are mostly concentrated around the diagonal. That's where most candidates are, and they're single-peaked around this egalitarian interventionist position. Voters, however, are not single-peaked, and they're much more spread out over the political space. And there's a large concentration of citizens who, if we look at these items, are both egalitarian and anti-interventionist, which would be a very strange position to have, because apparently you want socio-economic equality, but you don't want the government intervention to realize that. So, why does it matter? Basically, you can say that the positions of politicians are concentrated on this blue line, and the positions of voters are spread out over the space. And we have to, in order to correctly represent these distances, look at this from a four-dimensional perspective and not collapse the positions of citizens into this left-right dimension, because that would be distorting the distance between them. So, let's say that we've got a party which is a little triangle and a voter which is the little circle. If we would collapse their positions into a single left-right dimension, we would project the position of the citizens onto this left-right dimension. And then the distance between the citizen and the party would actually be very small. However, if we use, in this case, the two-dimensional space, and actually it is a four-dimensional space, the distance between them is much larger. So here, this centrist party has got a center-left citizen, if we use a single-dimensional representation. However, the citizen in blue is far away from the politician as an extreme right citizen. So actually there's a very large difference between them. What does this mean? Here I've presented the distances between voters and parties in these one-dimensional distances and in these four-dimensional distances. What you can see here is that consistently the distances between citizens and parties is larger in this four-dimensional space. It's about 50% larger. And this means that if we correctly show these distances at a four-dimensional space, citizens and politicians are actually quite far apart on socio-economic issues. And not just in the positions that they take. I mean, you talked about citizens being more pro-EU and more anti-EU. That isn't the question here. It's not that they're more left-wing or more right-wing, but there's a difference in the possible positions that citizens can take, because citizens are spread out all over the space and politicians are concentrated on this left-right dimension. And that means, essentially, that Europe's citizens cannot determine their own destinies. They're semi-sovereign in the terms of Schatzsnyder and Mayer. And the supply, which comes only in left, center, and right, doesn't meet the demand, which is much more diverse, which is actually, in this case, four-dimensional. And I think, if we think about the European Union offering solutions to our socio-economic problems, the fact that the supply side is limited and that the true diversity of citizens' views can't be translated is a problem.
Thank you very much.